Have you ever looked at the man you shared a bed with for 8 years and wondered if a monster was hiding behind his warm smile? Planning to destroy your life, I never believed in perfect betrayals until a freezing winter morning in Seattle. My husband walked out with a sweet goodbye kiss. 15 minutes later, my paralyzed mother-in-law stood straight up from her wheelchair. With perfectly healthy eyes, she unveiled a chilling plot I never saw coming. Hello, dear listeners of Maya Revenge Stories. Thank you so deeply for your unwavering support. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us with zero budget to operate, which means we are forced to halt new public uploads very soon and move our efforts exclusively to Patreon. If you find today's story compelling, please consider supporting us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon, where you will unlock access to even more incredible, exclusive true stories that are longer and filled with vivid, uncut details we simply cannot share on YouTube, featuring multiple voice actors to bring every emotion to life. You can join our inner circle right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the video description or the comments section. Now, let us begin today's nightmare, seen through the eyes of our protagonist, Nora Jackson. It was a Tuesday morning in Seattle, the kind where the heavy gray clouds seemed to press right against the windows, wrapping the house in a suffocating chill. Inside, however, everything felt perfectly warm and painfully normal. My husband, Julian, stood by the front door adjusting the collar of his expensive wool coat. He was headed to Silicon Valley for a critical 3-day business trip. As always, he looked impeccably handsome, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he pulled me into a gentle embrace. He kissed my forehead, a gesture so tender it made my heart flutter, just as it had for the past 8 years of our marriage. "I love you," he murmured against my skin. "Please take good care of Mom while I'm gone. Make sure she takes her medication right on time." I nodded, smiling, assuring him I would handle everything. I watched through the glass panes of the front door as his sleek black sedan backed out of the driveway and disappeared into the morning mist. The house fell into a deep, heavy silence, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I walked into the living room, where my mother-in-law, Beatrice, sat slumped in her specialized medical wheelchair. 4 months ago, a severe stroke had supposedly stolen her mobility and her speech, leaving her paralyzed on her right side and staring blankly at the television screen day after day. I sighed, feeling a familiar ache of sympathy in my chest, and turned toward the kitchen to brew a fresh pot of coffee. Exactly 15 minutes passed. I was wiping down the granite countertops, listening to the rain tap against the glass, when a sudden distinct creak of the floorboards echoed from the living room. It was not the sound of a house settling. It was the sound of footsteps. I froze, the damp cloth slipping from my fingers. I stepped slowly out of the kitchen, my breath catching in my throat. There, standing completely upright in the center of the Persian rug, was Beatrice. She was not leaning on anything. She was not trembling, nor was she favoring her right leg. The frail, vacant woman I had been spoon-feeding for months was gone. In her place stood a sharp, imposing figure, her eyes locked onto mine with a terrifying clarity. Before I could even process the absolute impossibility of the sight, Beatrice crossed the room with rapid, purposeful strides. She grabbed my wrist. Her grip was like a vice, entirely devoid of the weakness I thought she had. She leaned in close, her voice a harsh, frantic whisper. "We have to leave before he comes back, or we are both going to die." My mind went completely blank. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Mom, what are you doing? You can walk. How are you walking?" I stammered, my vision blurring at the edges as panic set in. I thought I was losing my mind, witnessing a medical hallucination born of sheer exhaustion. "Listen to me, Nora," she snapped, shaking my arm to force my focus. The stroke was real. It happened. But I regained my strength a long time ago. I had to stay in that chair. I had to play dead. Play dead why? The words tasted like ash in my mouth. "Because of Julian," she said, her voice dripping with a venom I had never heard before. I started noticing how unnaturally exhausted I felt every single afternoon. I thought it was the recovery. But then I saw him. I saw your perfect husband standing in the kitchen, crushing high-dose animal sedatives into a fine powder and mixing them into my soup. He has been poisoning me. Nora, keeping me docile, keeping me trapped. The room started to spin. My Julian, the man who brought me breakfast in bed. The man who cried when my childhood dog passed away. It was impossible. No, I whispered, shaking my head frantically. You are confused. The stroke must have affected your memory. Beatrice let go of my wrist, turned back to her wheelchair, and shoved her hand deep into the hidden compartment under the foam cushion. She yanked out 2 items and slammed them onto the coffee table. The first was a cheap, plastic prepaid burner phone. The second was a printed piece of paper. I stepped forward, my hands shaking violently as I picked up the paper. It was an electronic flight itinerary. A one-way. First-class ticket to Geneva, Switzerland. The passenger name printed in bold black letters was Julian Jackson. The departure date was Friday, just 3 days from now. "He is not going to Silicon Valley," Beatrice said coldly, her eyes reflecting the storm brewing outside the window. "He is tying up loose ends, and we are the biggest loose ends he has left." Staring at the ticket, the intricate illusion of my 8-year marriage shattered into a million jagged pieces. The warmth of his goodbye kiss just 15 minutes ago now felt like the icy touch of a grim reaper. Every late night at the office, every secret phone call he claimed was just a client, every cup of tea he insisted on making for me, it was all a meticulously crafted trap. I looked up at the woman who had shared my roof, realizing we were merely 2 inmates in a prison built by the man we both loved. A surge of pure, icy adrenaline washed away my confusion. I did not know exactly what Julian was planning, but I knew Beatrice was right. If we stayed in this house, we would not live to see the weekend. We had to run. We abandoned the house exactly as it was. I did not bother packing a bag or grabbing a coat. I just grabbed my keys and practically dragged Beatrice into the passenger seat of my electric car. Less than 45 minutes later, we descended into the subterranean parking garage of Luminatech Dynamics, the artificial intelligence software startup I had built from the ground up over the last 6 years. The executive floor was a ghost town at 8 o'clock in the morning. The motion sensor lights flickered on one by one, casting a sterile, blinding white glow over the minimalist glass walls. Usually, stepping into this office filled me with a profound sense of pride and accomplishment. Today, the transparent walls felt like the reinforced glass of a maximum security interrogation room. Julian was my chief financial officer. I had handed him the keys to the financial kingdom because I trusted him implicitly. Now, that trust tasted like battery acid in the back of my throat. I sprinted to my private office, locked the reinforced door behind us, and booted up my primary workstation. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, bypassing the standard security protocols, to log in with my master founder encryption keys. I needed to see exactly what he had been doing inside our secure servers. My mind violently flashed back to a rainy Tuesday night exactly 3 weeks ago. I had been awake for nearly 48 hours, obsessively debugging our latest machine learning model. My vision was swimming, and my head was pounding. Julian had walked in wearing his softest cashmere sweater, gently rubbing my tense shoulders, and setting a steaming mug of chamomile tea on my desk. He had placed a thick stack of printed contracts right next to my keyboard. "Just the routine quarterly audit compliance forms, my love," he had whispered, kissing my temple. "Sign these and please come to bed. You are working yourself to death." I had signed them. In my absolute exhaustion, I had blindly signed every single page without reading a single line of text. Now, staring at the digitized scans of those exact documents on my glowing monitor, my blood turned to ice. I ran the text through our internal legal analysis software. It took less than 10 seconds for the system to highlight the horrifying reality. These were not audit forms. They were irrevocable asset transfer deeds. I had legally signed away 100% of my intellectual property rights, the core source code, and all 7 of Luminatech's foundational patents. The recipient was a newly formed offshore shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. He had stolen my entire life's work right from under my nose, weaponizing my own exhaustion against me. A sharp tap on the glass desk broke my terrifying trance. Beatrice was holding up Julian's cheap plastic burner phone. "My late husband worked for the Department of Defense for 30 years, Beatrice said, her voice steady and commanding. "I made a phone call from your car to an old friend in the intelligence sector. He owed our family a very large favor. He sent a decryption packet to your private email address. Plug this filthy device into your computer right now." I nodded, finding a data cable and tethering the burner phone directly into my secure terminal. I downloaded the file Beatrice's contact had sent and executed the program. Lines of green code cascaded down my screen in a blur. The brute force attack chewed through the basic security of the burner phone in exactly 3 minutes and 12 seconds. A heavily encrypted messaging application popped open on my screen. I clicked on the most recent thread, and the room seemed to instantly lose all its oxygen. Julian was not just stealing my patents. He was negotiating an underground fire sale. "The legal transfer is fully finalized," Julian had written to an unsaved international number just 12 hours ago. "Luminatech is completely hollowed out. Wire the initial down payment of $15 million to the Swiss account by Thursday morning." The anonymous buyer replied instantly, "And what about your wife? What about the mother? They will raise the alarm when the accounts run dry." Julian's response made my stomach violently heave. "My wife is clueless and will be legally bound to the corporate debt," his message read. "As for the old woman, her trust fund unlocks on Thursday afternoon. Once I drain her remaining $3 million, I am cutting the brake lines on their car. The local police will rule it a tragic accident on those steep Seattle hills. I will be safely in Geneva by Friday." How was going to kill us? The high-dose sedatives were just to keep Beatrice quiet and out of the way until the massive trust fund cleared. He was actively planning to murder his own mother and his wife just to cover his financial tracks. I covered my mouth with both hands, struggling to hold back a piercing scream. Beatrice stood perfectly still, her face carved from cold stone, reading the exact words her only son had typed. Suddenly, the suffocating silence of the office was shattered by a soft, melodic chime. It was my personal cell phone buzzing against the glass desk. I jumped, my heart hammering against my ribs, and picked it up with a fiercely trembling hand. It was a standard text message from Julian. "Just landed safely at the airport, honey," the message read. "The weather down here in the valley is beautiful, but I'm already missing you and Mom so much. Take good care of her for me. I love you both more than anything in the world." The sheer, absolute hypocrisy radiating from the glowing screen was a physical blow to my chest. The man I loved was sending me digital kisses while meticulously finalizing the blueprint for my slaughter. I stared at his sweet words, fighting the intense, blinding urge to vomit. The sheer malice of his plan defied all logic, demanding an explanation we simply did not have. Within 2 hours, Beatrice had utilized another of her late husband's secretive contacts, securing an emergency meeting with a notorious private financial investigator based in the shadowy underbelly of downtown Seattle. We met him in a soundproofed conference room at my office. He was a ruthless forensic accountant who charged $2,000 an hour and asked absolutely no moral questions. His name was irrelevant. His results were all that mattered. For 3 agonizing hours, the investigator dug through the encrypted layers of Julian's hidden digital life. He bypassed offshore firewalls and traced hidden blockchain ledgers. What he uncovered was not a simple tale of corporate greed. It was a descent into absolute madness. Julian had not just been stealing to get rich, he was drowning. Over the past 18 months, my perfect calculated husband had developed a severe addiction to high-leverage, cryptocurrency trading. He had gambled heavily on volatile digital coins, chasing massive, unrealistic returns. When the market crashed, he lost catastrophically. But he did not just lose his own savings. Desperate to cover his tracks and win back his losses, he had borrowed a staggering $7 million from a violently dangerous underground syndicate operating out of Eastern Europe. The investigator pulled up a series of intercepted emails on the projector screen that made the blood freeze in my veins. The syndicate was demanding immediate repayment by the end of this month, attaching horrifying, graphic photos of what they did to their defaulters. Julian's grand escape to Switzerland was not just a luxurious retirement plan, it was a desperate flight for physical survival. But the most sinister part was the structural framing of his monumental debt. He had forged my signature and used my biometric security bypasses to secure the initial underground loans, using Luminatech Dynamics as the primary collateral. His master plan was to drain my company and his mother's trust fund, wire the clean cash to an untraceable Swiss vault, and vanish into thin air. He was going to leave me holding the bag, offering me up as a sacrificial lamb to a ruthless mob who would undoubtedly torture and kill me to recoup their $7 million. He was throwing my life away to buy his own freedom. Sitting across the glass table, Beatrice slowly reached into her oversized leather handbag. Her hands, which I had believed were completely paralyzed just hours ago, were steady and precise. She pulled out a small, tightly sealed plastic bag filled with dozens of crushed, powdery white capsules. "For the last 4 months, I have been living in a waking nightmare," Beatrice whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of profound grief and boiling rage. "Every single afternoon, he would bring me my soup. He would stroke my hair, call me sweet names, and spoon-feed me. I had to swallow the broth, but I would hold the bitter sediment under my tongue. The moment he left the room to take a phone call, I would spit the poison into a napkin and hide it inside the lining of my wheelchair. At night, while he slept soundly in the bed next to yours, I would lie completely awake in the dark. I listened to him pacing the hallways, negotiating his debts in hushed tones, and meticulously plotting our murders." A single tear slipped down her weathered cheek, not out of fear, but out of a mother's ultimate world-shattering heartbreak. "I gave birth to a monster, Nora. I nurtured the devil himself." I could not breathe. The walls of the conference room felt like they were rapidly collapsing inward, crushing my chest. I abruptly stood up, murmuring a desperate apology, and practically sprinted down the hall to the executive restroom. I locked the heavy oak door behind me and collapsed onto the cold marble floor. The emotional dam broke violently. I sobbed until my throat bled, gasping for air as 8 years of beautiful, cherished memories twisted into hideous, mocking nightmares. I mourned the man who had kissed my forehead that very morning. I mourned the future children we had so excitedly planned to have. I mourned the naive, blindly trusting woman I had been just a few short hours ago. Every laugh we shared, every anniversary dinner, every late-night whisper was nothing but a calculated manipulation to fatten me up for the slaughter. I was nothing but a pawn on his chessboard of survival. I lay on that freezing floor for exactly 45 minutes. I cried out every ounce of love, every drop of pity, and every fragment of weakness I had left in my entire body. And then, the tears simply stopped. The searing, unbearable pain in my chest hardened, calcifying into something cold, sharp, and entirely unbreakable. I pulled myself up by the edge of the sink and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were red and swollen, but the woman looking back at me was no longer a victim waiting for the executioner. She was a survivor. She was a predator. I turned on the icy water, splashed it over my face, and meticulously fixed my hair until not a single strand was out of place. When I walked back into the conference room, Beatrice looked up from the table. She saw the absolute, terrifying shift in my posture. The shattered, heartbroken daughter-in-law was gone permanently. "He thinks we are just two helpless, disposable women," I said, my voice eerily calm, devoid of any warmth or hesitation. "He thinks you are a paralyzed burden, and I am a blind, exhausted workaholic." Beatrice slowly stood up, squaring her shoulders as a dangerous, knowing smile spread across her face. She reached across the glass table and grasped my hand with incredible strength. Let him keep thinking exactly that, Beatrice replied softly, her eyes flashing with lethal intent. In that sterile, brightly lit room, two women from entirely different generations, bound together by the ultimate, unforgivable betrayal, forged a silent, deadly alliance. We swore an oath right then and there. We were not just going to survive this nightmare, we were going to obliterate Julian Jackson, tearing his meticulous plan to shreds and dragging him into the very abyss he had dug for us. The silence of my office was shattered by the sudden vibration of my cell phone against the glass desk. The caller ID flashed with a smiling photo of Julian, a picture I had taken on our 5th anniversary in Paris. My stomach violently churned, but I closed my eyes, took a deep, stabilizing breath, and forced my vocal cords to project absolute, unwavering warmth. When I answered, my voice dripped with the sweet innocence he expected. Julian sounded breathless, overflowing with manufactured excitement. He told me he was cutting his Silicon Valley trip short. He claimed he had secured a massive, life-changing partnership and was flying back to Seattle immediately. Furthermore, he was bringing 3 major investors to our home for dinner at exactly 8 o'clock that evening to sign the final paperwork. I knew exactly what this meant. There were no legitimate venture capitalists flying up from California. These were the syndicate enforcers, the shadow men, coming to collect their $7 million debt. Julian was cornered, and this dinner was his final, desperate move to force my hand into signing away the company before making his grand escape to Geneva. I gripped the edge of my desk so hard, my knuckles turned white, but I kept my tone incredibly light and supportive. I told him how proud I was of him. I promised to bake his favorite rosemary chicken and ensure the house was spotless. He called me his perfect angel, kissed the phone, and hung up. The moment the line disconnected, I threw the device across the room, watching it shatter against the wall. There was no more time to grieve. The hunt had officially begun. I immediately summoned my lead corporate attorney, a ruthless, fiercely loyal legal shark who had helped me build Lumina Tech from a tiny garage operation into an industry giant. We locked ourselves in the server room for 6 agonizing hours, completely bypassing the standard financial protocols Julian thought he controlled. Together, we engineered a digital poison pill, embedding a highly complex, hidden trigger deep within the blockchain architecture of the transfer deeds. Julian planned to use. It was a masterpiece of corporate sabotage. The smart contract was designed to look entirely normal on the surface, but the exact microsecond Julian and his goons executed the final digital signatures to transfer the $15 million buyout, the system would instantly intercept the routing numbers. Instead of flowing into his untraceable Swiss vault, every single penny would be automatically rerouted into an impenetrable escrow account fully monitored and frozen by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Armed with the lethal software update, I sped back to the house. The sky above Seattle had bruised into a deep, stormy purple. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocatingly calm, carrying the heavy static air that always precedes a devastating hurricane. Beatrice was waiting for me in the living room. It was time for her to step back into the agonizing prison she had just escaped. Without a single word of complaint, she lowered her tall, dignified frame back into the hated medical wheelchair. I stood in the doorway and watched in absolute awe as she meticulously transformed before my eyes. She curved her spine inward, shrinking her posture to appear frail and broken. She intentionally dropped her right shoulder, letting her arm hang lifelessly off the armrest. Then, she worked on her face. The sharp, calculating intelligence that usually burned in her eyes slowly dissolved, replaced by a hollow, vacant stare that looked straight through the walls. She practiced letting the right side of her mouth droop heavily, capturing the exact, heartbreaking physical aftermath of a severe neurological stroke. It was a flawless, terrifying mimicry. This was the performance of a lifetime, fueled by a mother's pure, icy vengeance against the monster she had brought into the world. While Beatrice perfected her silent role, I moved methodically through our beautifully decorated home, turning my personal sanctuary into a high-tech surveillance trap. Using equipment I had quietly procured from my company's security division, I spent 2 hours installing high-definition micro cameras and ultra-sensitive audio transmitters. I hid one lens deep inside the petals of the floral centerpiece on the dining table. I tucked another behind the brass pendulum of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway. A third was seamlessly integrated into the air conditioning vent directly above Julian's customary seat at the head of the table. Every single lie, every hushed threat, and every physical movement would be broadcasted live and permanently recorded to a secure, offshore cloud server that Julian could never touch. By 7 o'clock, the house was immaculate. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic filled the air, creating a sickeningly perfect illusion of domestic bliss. I turned off the main lights, leaving only the dim, amber glow of the hallway sconces. Beatrice and I sat together in the pitch-black darkness of the living room. We did not turn on the television. We did not play any background music. We did not even whisper to each other. The only sound in the entire house was the heavy, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock counting down the seconds. We sat there completely motionless, our breathing synchronized in the quiet dark. We were no longer a wife and a mother. We were two predatory spiders, resting silently at the absolute center of a meticulously woven web, listening intently for the sound of Julian's tires rolling into the driveway. Exactly at 8 o'clock in the evening, the heavy crunch of tires rolling onto the gravel driveway pierced the suffocating silence of the house. Headlights swept like searchlights across the living room walls, casting long, distorted shadows. I stood up from the sofa, smoothing the front of my silk dress, and pasted a perfectly naive, welcoming smile onto my face. The heavy oak front door swung open. Julian stepped inside, bringing a sharp gust of freezing winter wind with him. Behind him loomed 3 massively built men in immaculate, pitch-black suits. They did not look anything like the polished Silicon Valley venture capitalists he had described on the phone. They possessed the cold, dead eyes of apex predators, their thick necks, broken noses, and calloused hands completely betrayed their true profession. These were the syndicate enforcers, the shadow men who had come to collect their $7 million blood debt. Julian beamed, playing his role to absolute, nauseating perfection. He dropped his leather briefcase by the door, walked right up to me, and pressed a tender kiss to my forehead. "Darling, I missed you so much," he murmured, his breath warm against my skin. He then turned his attention to the corner of the room where Beatrice sat slumped in her wheelchair. He knelt beside her, his face instantly transforming into a portrait of profound sorrow and filial devotion. He gently wiped a drop of fabricated saliva from her drooping lip with his expensive silk handkerchief, then carefully draped a thick woolen blanket over her motionless legs. "Hello, Mom," he whispered softly, stroking her gray hair. "I am home." The sheer, psychopathic audacity of his performance made my stomach violently churn. I watched him caress the mother he planned to murder in that very chair in less than 48 hours. Beatrice played her part flawlessly, staring blankly ahead, her right eye twitching exactly as she had practiced in the dark. Julian stood up and gestured to the silent giants behind him. "Nora, these are the key partners from the investment firm, Mr. Volkov, Mr. Ivanov, and Mr. Sokolov. They flew all the way from Europe just to finalize our acquisition." I stepped forward and shook their hands. Their grips were bone-crushing, their smiles entirely devoid of any human warmth. We moved into the formal dining room. The aroma of roasted chicken and garlic filled the air, mocking the terrifying reality of the situation. The 4 men sat down. The floral centerpiece, hiding the high-definition microcamera, sat perfectly undisturbed in the middle of the table. Julian did not even bother pouring the vintage red wine before he reached into his briefcase and yanked out a thick stack of legal documents. He slapped the papers squarely onto the mahogany table in front of my empty porcelain plate. Next to the contracts, he deliberately placed a heavy, gold-plated fountain pen. "I know we were supposed to eat first, my love," Julian said, his voice dripping with syrupy, suffocating concern. "But these gentlemen have an incredibly tight flight schedule. If we just get these final transfer deeds signed right now, The $15 million will clear into our accounts by morning. You have been working yourself to the absolute bone for 6 years. Nora, you are completely exhausted. Your skin is pale. You desperately need rest. Just sign the papers. Let me take this massive burden off your shoulders, and we can finally just enjoy our beautiful lives together. I picked up the gold pen, rolling the cold metal slowly between my trembling fingers. I looked down at the first page of the contract, feeling the burning gaze of the 3 enforcers boring into my skull. I took a slow breath and began my calculated delay. I am just a little confused, Julian, I said, keeping my vocal tone incredibly soft and hesitant. I thought the acquiring holding company was based in California. Why does this jurisdiction clause clearly state that the entire entity is governed by the Cayman Islands? And why is there a complete, irrevocable waiver of liability for the acquiring board? Julian rapidly adjusted his silk tie. The temperature in the room seemed to spike. A tiny, glittering bead of sweat materialized at his right temple. It is just standard international tax structuring, darling. He forced a chuckle that sounded like grinding glass. It is nothing you need to worry your beautiful head about. The legal team already reviewed every single page. I flipped to the 3rd page, entirely ignoring his desperate urgency. I dragged my fingernail down the dense text. But look right here at Section 4. Julian, it explicitly transfers all 7 of my core artificial intelligence patents for a tiny fraction of their current market value. Not only that, but it saddles Luminatech Dynamics with an immediate $7 million corporate debt payload. That does not make any logical sense. Why on earth would my company absorb their massive liabilities? Julian's fake, loving smile twitched violently, threatening to collapse entirely. He opened his mouth, but before he could formulate another manipulation, the man introduced as Mr. Volkov leaned heavily forward. His massive frame seemed to swallow the dining chair. He did not look at the contract. He stared directly into my eyes, his gaze devoid of any mercy. Mrs. Jackson, Volkov rumbled, his thick Eastern European accent slicing through the tense air of the room like a butcher knife. The global business world is highly unpredictable. Just like human life, tragic accidents happen every single day. A careless slip on a steep staircase, a sudden brake failure on those dangerously wet Seattle hills. It would be a terrible, devastating tragedy if something unfortunate happened to you, or to your lovely to fragile mother-in-law sitting right there, before you manage to secure your financial future. The generous offer on that table expires completely tonight. We highly recommend you conclude this business right away for everyone's continued safety. The threat was no longer passive or hidden. It was a physical weight pressing against my throat. I looked at Julian, pretending to wait for my husband to furiously defend his wife and mother against such blatant intimidation. Instead, the final, pathetic remnants of his gentle mask violently melted away. The sheer panic of his looming deadline and the terrifying presence of his ruthless creditors completely shattered his practiced composure. His face turned a deep, mottled red. The veins in his neck bulged grotesquely. Julian slammed both of his clenched fists onto the mahogany table with a deafening crash that violently rattled the crystal wine glasses. He vaulted out of his chair and leaned heavily over the table, his eyes wide and bloodshot, his voice dropping into a guttural, terrifying snarl I had never heard in 8 years of marriage. "Stop reading the damn papers, Nora," he roared, a spray of spit flying from his trembling lips. He lunged forward, grabbing my right wrist with bone-bruising force. He pried my fingers open and physically shoved the gold pen deep into my palm, squeezing my hand tight. "I am utterly sick of your endless questions. I am sick of playing this game. Put the pen on the paper and sign your name right this second, or I swear to God you will both deeply regret it." The heavy gold nib of the fountain pen was less than a millimeter away from the thick paper. Julian was breathing heavily through his nose, his grip on my wrist feeling like an iron shackle. The 3 enforcers leaned closer, their eyes locked on my hand. At that exact second, a sudden, sharp rustle of fabric shattered the suffocating tension. Beatrice aggressively shoved the heavy woolen blanket off her lap. It fell to the floor with a soft thud. Then, she stood up. She did not struggle. She did not lean on the armrests. She rose with the towering, majestic authority of a queen reclaiming her throne. All the feigned weakness, the drooping lip, and the hollow stare vanished instantly. Her eyes burned with absolute, unadulterated fury. Julian gasped, releasing my wrist as if my skin had suddenly caught fire. He stumbled violently backward, his chair crashing to the hardwood floor. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified, pale ghost. He stared at his paralyzed mother walking perfectly normally across the room. She reached the heavy oak double doors of the dining room and firmly slid the brass deadbolt into place, locking all of us inside. "Mom," Julian choked out, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched squeak. "How are you standing?" Beatrice ignored his question. She reached into the deep pockets of her cardigan and produced a thick, neatly bound dossier. She marched back to the table and slammed the documents down directly on top of the fraudulent contracts. "I kept every single capsule, Julian," Beatrice said, her voice booming through the room, vibrating with a mother's ultimate heartbreak and rage. "Those are the independent lab reports. High-dose animal sedatives, traced directly back to your encrypted offshore bank accounts. You slowly poisoned your own mother to steal my $3 million trust fund." The three syndicate men looked rapidly between Julian and Beatrice. Realizing the illusion was collapsing, Mr. Volkov reached inside his pitch-black suit jacket, but I did not even flinch. I reached under the table and pulled out my encrypted tablet. "And you tried to steal my entire life's work to pay off your $7 million crypto debt," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. I stared right into Julian's terrified eyes and firmly pressed the bright red icon flashing on my screen. "What did you just do?" Julian screamed, lunging toward me. "I just executed a total administrative override at Luminatech Dynamics," I replied coldly. "Your biometric access is permanently revoked. Your corporate accounts are vaporized. But more importantly, I triggered the poison pill embedded in the digital transfer protocol your friends here thought they were signing." I turned my gaze to Volkov and his towering enforcers. "The smart contract you were waiting for was a decoy. The moment your digital network established a handshake with my servers, my system intercepted your routing numbers. Your entire $15 million underground syndicate fund has not only been permanently frozen, but it has been fully reported and automatically surrendered to the Department of Homeland Security for international money laundering." Volkov roared in anger, drawing a heavy, silenced pistol from his holster. But before he could even raise his arm, a deafening cacophony of sirens erupted from every direction outside the house. Intense, blinding red and blue lights instantly flooded through the dining room windows, painting the walls in chaotic colors. The heavy front door was violently breached. The thunderous sound of heavy boots echoed in the hallway. Heavily armed federal agents completely surrounded the house. The locked dining room doors were kicked open. "Drop the weapons right now, get your hands in the air," a tactical commander shouted over the chaotic noise, a dozen laser sights locking directly onto the three enforcers. Realizing they were completely outmatched, Volkov and his men slowly lowered their guns and dropped to the floor, their massive hands laced behind their heads. In the center of the room, the architect of this entire nightmare finally broke. Julian collapsed onto his knees. The suave, calculated manipulator was completely gone, replaced by a sobbing, pathetic shell of a man. He crawled toward my feet, tears streaming down his face, leaving wet streaks on his cheeks. "Nora, please," he sobbed hysterically, grasping at the hem of my silk dress. "I was desperate. The market crashed. They were going to kill me. Mom, please tell them you are my mother. You have to forgive me." Beatrice looked down at him with an expression of pure, unbreakable ice. "I have no son," she whispered. I looked at the pathetic creature crying on my floor. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I reached into my left hand and slowly slid the heavy diamond wedding ring off my finger. I held it over his half-empty crystal glass of vintage red wine and simply let it drop. It sank to the bottom with a quiet clink. I smoothly stepped around his trembling body and walked toward the door, leaving him to the federal agents who were aggressively pulling his arms behind his back. The cold steel handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists, locking his fate away forever. 6 months later, the freezing winter of Seattle had given way to a bright, beautiful spring. Beatrice and I stood in front of the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my brand-new corner office at Luminatech Dynamics. The company was thriving, stronger than it had ever been. I handed Beatrice a crystal flute filled with expensive champagne. We looked out at the glowing city skyline, raised our glasses, and toasted to our absolute freedom, breathing in the sweet, crisp air of a new, radiant chapter of our lives, completely untouched by the shadow of the betrayer. Thank you so incredibly much, dear listeners, for tuning in to the very end of this harrowing journey. We would love to know where you are listening to this story from, so please let us know your city or country in the comments below. If you found today's story thrilling and satisfying, we kindly ask for your help. As we mentioned, our channel has unfortunately been demonetized, meaning we have zero budget to continue operating on this platform. We will not be uploading any new public videos on YouTube in the near future. Instead, we are moving our entire operation to Patreon. Please support us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon family, where you can listen to the absolute best, most exclusive, and incredibly long true stories that are far too intense and detailed to ever be published on YouTube. You can join us right now by simply scanning the QR code on your screen, or by clicking the Patreon link provided in the description box and the pinned comment below. Thank you for standing by us, and we cannot wait to share our next untold secret with you over on Patreon.